I've been a longtime fan of the online Phantasy Star titles. Even back to the turn-based games from consoles like the Sega Master System though, the series has innovated and the franchise's influence is still seen to this day. It's arguable that Monster Hunter wouldn't even exist without Phantasy Star Online. However, the state of PSO2 New Genesis is, in my opinion, frankly tragic. I've considered and even drafted pieces of scripts for a video like this a lot over the last year or so, but never really committed because structured videos, especially with voiceovers, are not anything I have much experience with or particularly like to do. And it's always seemed like maybe, just maybe, something around the corner might change things with the game. At this point though, it's time for me to recognize the fundamental problems with the game and how Sega hasn't shown strong signs of actually addressing them sufficiently. It should go without saying that the views expressed are my own. I don't think anyone is wrong for disagreeing with any or all of what I say. Feel free to speak your mind in the comments or anywhere else you find me. I'm always open to and happy to discuss the sorts of things I'll be getting into here. It's no secret that Phantasy Star Online 2 had its own problems, content droughts, and trouble with defining itself. However, the game it ended up becoming was nothing short of amazing, in my opinion. It's one of my favorite and most played games to this day. It didn't arrive at this point because games grow like plants and need only time. It got there because they ran into issues, made mistakes, solicited feedback, and improved and iterated on their designs. They learned a wealth of things on what works and what doesn't, but to be frank, it seems like they've simply thrown all those lessons and that experience out of the window with New Genesis. Instead of doing what they now know works or iterating on their successes, it seems like the team in charge is more interested in constantly and poorly reinventing the wheel. A prime example of what I mean would be how base PSO2 and NGS structure solo boss fight quests. Base game's solo ultimate fights with Masquerader and Sodom are structured extremely well. They don't invalidate the gear players work so hard to build up. In fact, they reward you for doing so, and they have a difficulty curve that makes sense and are fun to push yourself through. Dual quests in NGS have a difficulty curve that I would consider completely backwards, and the fact that they invalidate the gear players grinded for, which is kind of the point of these games, is inexcusable. I understand the mindset that shaking things up might be healthy or even necessary, though many blockbuster franchises survive perfectly well staying in their own lanes. I'm not even of the opinion that the move to open fields is inherently wrong or unsustainable. Honestly, open world content can be a ton of fun and could work really well with some of PSO2's systems. It can facilitate the kinds of emergent gameplay and especially the impromptu communal and cooperative experiences that MMOs should strive for. Despite really disliking tab target MMO combat, I have an absolute blast playing Guild Wars 2 for its open world content, with unique world bosses and interesting large-scale and map-changing meta events or event chains. Final Fantasy XIV also does well in this regard with Fates, and I personally enjoyed Hunt Trains a lot as a laid-back casual thing to do when I didn't feel like sweating in other games. The closest NGS has had to this was veteran mob farming that peaked in Retem, then fell off as Dreadkeeper augments fell out of favor in the meta. They further invalidated reason to be in the open fields by scaling Gigantics mobs out of whack and making purple triggers easier and far more rewarding, along with things like Geometric Labyrinth Ring 2 dropping Gigas and Dominant type augments far more than you would ever find or craft them, and the near constantly running seasonal events having gear and the augments in their shops. At this point in the game, why would anyone spend time in the open world? All this said, having some instanced repeatable content is a staple of games in the genre, but unfortunately this is another area where NGS fails. The content is either usually dead on arrival like the janky Cannonball quests or Ordinal Tower, temporary like in seasonal events, or they massively overcorrect the rewards problem by invalidating other content and just dropping nearly everything you could possibly need all in one quest, as I mentioned Geolab does. Different pieces of content having unique loot is important, and spreading the materials for gear progression across content types helps keep things from being stale, burning people out, and creating a variety of avenues for players to progress their gear or make money. Some overlap is fine and even beneficial, but it's a somewhat fine line to balance, and you have to keep in mind how much players will optimize the fun out of a game. See Blizzardium. Honestly, as much as I dislike the formulaic, tired seasonal event design and loathe PSE burst farming, seasonal points is one area they actually do this alright. Combat sectors are great for raw meseta and seasonal points, while the limited time quests are usually good for seasonal points and have other possible drops like scratch tickets, upgrade materials, or camos. But, like I said, seasonal event shops do have a problem with being a shortcut to getting too many of the items that other content should be specialized in. Some suggestions I have here would be for Geolab to specialize its loot table more. Maybe instead of having all the augments it has, make it a way to farm mastery. S-rank speedruns of it do require some degree of mastery after all. Make Dreadkeeper a more competitive capsule offensively, lower field gigas down by 4 to 5 levels, increasing their drop rate of tier 4 augments, and massively increase the drop rate of note type augments, with veterans, gigas, and trials dropping 5 to 10 or more at once, to encourage crafting Domina and thus Halfa Nally by farming zones all around Halfa. Having all these specific types of content have specialized and unique loot that is only rarely found elsewhere brings a lot of value into different activities that different players might enjoy, instead of only 1 or 2 things being relevant, especially when those things are instanced away from the rest of the player base and take place in these boring Trania environments. Recon Gigants and Stia were a somewhat cool idea, I guess, to spice up the formula for exploration zones, and did bring players together farming such zones for a time. The split between casually farming Infernium from them or from purple triggers, which mostly required a group or more effort, was decent, and I thought the somewhat granular progression of grabbing a clean Kuklafis weapon and then working towards one with Fixa Attack 3 with much more Infernium was a small step in the right direction for crafted weapons. Unfortunately, Darkfall's Aegis and the Neos weapons were 2 steps backwards and killed this off. The new Gigas Strugment exchange, which the Starless Gigantics and Recons will feed into, doesn't really look compelling to me. With Phase 1 Defi capsules few will care about, and Gigas capsules you can probably get more efficiently from Geolab, Purple Triggers, or seasonal event shops that are available more often than not the last 6-ish months. The camos to work towards are alright, and maybe the weapons will be worth farming, but I really don't have much hope for this weapon series to have any staying power, given how each bi-yearly update cycle has gone in the past. The gearing and itemization in general in NGS is really poor, which is part of what makes it hard to have the variety in active and valuable content that I keep talking about. There aren't enough different items and materials to fill many different loot tables. Preset abilities do add some value to weapon drops, but are far too rare, to the point where you might as well just forget about it for gated or rare weapon series. To me, preset abilities just seem like an extremely watered down, homogenized, and butchered version of S-grade augments from base PSO2, and so my idea of improving them and the itemization of the game as a whole is just to transform this failed system into a system that worked perfectly well in base game. Add a bunch of fixes that actually impact builds in more interesting ways, and make some capsules for some of them that are available as rare drops from some quests or bosses. S-grade augments add so much value to so many different quests and bosses in base game even to this day. The Lightweave Claws weapons and the Claws units are another example of the type of itemization I'd like to see, and which I think made base PSO2 so great. The progression from moving from a collection folder weapon into a Darkweave Agile weapon, working on upgrading that into a Lightweave Claws version, and then grinding out augments and SGAs if you so choose, was a process that felt really good throughout. Having crafted Claws units also helped the gearing process feel impactful, and one thing that's especially notable about them was the fact that the main materials to make them could be bought and sold on the player shops. You could supplement your progress with Meseta, profit from extra materials you earned in the process, or even target farm them as your niche way to make Meseta. Because itemization and gearing is so bare bones in NGS, the list of actually valuable and realistically attainable drops doesn't extend much past augment capsules. Furthermore, the augments in NGS are extremely homogeneous and unimpactful for the most part, mainly just being generic potency increases. As mentioned, S-grade augments in PSO2 are one huge thing that elevated this by adding variety to character builds and value to content. NGS could really stand to diversify the augment game by adding augments even with just things like critical hit bonuses or more significant floor potency increases to create a more fulfilling dichotomy between crit and non-crit builds. But even this is just scratching the surface. Photon Art specific potency increase is just one other idea I have for another type of augment, which would also aim to address in a small way the overemphasis on countering that has crept into every single class. Another system that has failed its purpose in NGS in a large way is the multi-weapon system. Originally sold and intended as a way to make interesting combinations to customize how you engage in combat, they end up being simply a way to use an item potential or preset ability from one weapon that you don't even want to use onto the weapon you choose. This isn't even something the community does to itself in the meta, it's encouraged by Sega themselves in the recent headline for the newest weapon series. It's just weird to me that in a game that is all about customizing everything about your character, even down to idle and run animations, The way you approach combat on any specific class, and even across all the different classes, is so rigid. Instead of embracing the customization aspect of the game and the systems they themselves built to customize combat in the game, they instead block you from making your own combat style and have shown no other signs of any of the other ways they let you add personal touches to your combat, like additional photon arts or customizing photon arts like base game had. Almost every single class plays almost exactly the same, even down to the same class skills being added across so many of them, as we see even in the class skill preview in the recent headline. How many times will they add a skill that makes normal attacks stronger after doing different photon arts, or will they keep going until every single class has this? Will they ever add any class skills or other incentives for positioning yourself outside of enemy attacks, instead of every single class wanting to be in melee range to dive headfirst into every enemy attack to counter them? Are the best skills that we can hope for things like spamming or holding normal attack or weapon action for literally up to 8 or even 15 seconds straight, as we see on Bouncer? And what about the fact that so many things are relegated to extra active skill buttons you need to put on your sub palette, which is already becoming extremely bloated on some classes, which is an absolute pain to deal with for controller players. Even Slayer launched with 2 of these that are uncomfortable to switch between on controller without using third-party applications. And this is really a damn shame, because Slayer clearly took a lot of inspiration from Luster, which uses the controller economy, so to speak, extremely well, with so many extra actions that are context sensitive. Tapping normal attack does a normal attack chain, but holding normal does something special depending on your weapon's element, and pressing normal attack with proper timing after actions like photon arts gives you access to 5 different extremely useful utility skills depending on if you hold forward, sideways, backwards, or no direction at all. There's similar diversity in actions in other buttons like weapon action in each photon art, which change depending on if you hold or tap them, or even further with enhanced combos rewarding proper timing to chain together the enhanced part of the held versions of photon arts. There's no such depth and almost no wise use of inputs to be seen in NGS, which is shameful because they already went out of their way to develop the simple action mechanic available to all classes. How much more simple can the classes get even without that? Some of the longest standing and biggest grievances I've had with NGS are the anti-consumer changes they made in the move from base PSO2 to NGS. Experience and drop boosters used to tick only while you were in active quests able to benefit from them, but now they are active while you are in town, offline, and even while the game is in maintenance. Not only that, the only boosters available in the SG shop are 24 hours long, either encouraging extremely unhealthy behavior to maximize your use of them, or selling you something you can't hope to even use the majority of. This is just incredibly scummy, no way around it. In base game, you accumulated a currency called fun points for doing just about anything in the game, especially things like interacting with other players by doing things like reviving people. Using these fun points in a scratch ticket, you could regularly get pass tickets to sell items on the player shops even as a free-to-play player. Now free-to-play players only get 3 days a month to sell in the shops, and only if they finish their mission pass chores. This hurts the in-game economy for everyone, including premium users, by heavily limiting the supply of items, especially with the low population. I also take issue with the PR team, who have regularly misled players, most obviously with the recent and still ongoing Ultra Evolution naming debacle. On the recent Headline Plus stream, G-Wiz of the Stars was, in my opinion, being really condescending and dismissive. She was also arguing in bad faith by trying to justify the lazy content of NGS with saying PSO also had reskins. Don't you have Dreamcast? Sure, we had Hilda Bear and Hilda Blue, but that doesn't come close to having Dytles, Dustles, Frostles, and Flamedles of Normal, Silver, Gold, Vera, Veteran, Gigantics, Megalotics, and now Starless variants. It really did seem like a "do you not have phones" moment, which was kinda grating because she went on just minutes later to reference exactly that, and then also called someone out in chat for supposedly arguing in bad faith. The only thing I could think of during all this was the Austin Powers mole scenes, knowing it was like that, trying not to say it, but not being able to help but say it. This isn't something specific to her or NGS, unfortunately. There are many instances in the recent past of community managers of other games deriding their customers, Blizzard being a notable example. There are also many in the community that keep arguing in bad faith that people don't know what the kind of content they want and nothing will make players happy. I can excuse this if they have only played NGS, but for anyone that has been around longer, this comes across as extremely dishonest. There's no reason we can't have Divide Quest. Each 5-stage chunk could end in each region's capstone boss and drop that region's relevant main material for making or upgrading weapons. There are plenty of bosses to fill suppression stages with, and you could have rare stages with the resplendent bosses, or rare bosses like Quartz Skoden to have special drops like camos and whatnot. There are plenty of areas around Halpha to have stages in, and there's already point collection objects and run speed boosters that can be used for things like covert ops stages. As already stated, there's no reason for Duel Quest to be so frustrating and disappointing when we already had solo ultimate fights in the base game. There's no reason we can't have a quest in Lessiel that takes inspiration from something like Ship Infiltration Enemy Battleship. All of these and more, Extreme Quest Risk Realm, Face of the Abyss, Armada UQs, etc., coexisted in the same update cycle, and all of them were worth doing for gear progression at the same time. It was truly the best of times. None of this should need 8 years of the game progressing to accomplish when they already have the experience, already have a library of assets and design documents, and already have enough enemies, bosses, and locales in the game. Another comment I see often in the community is that people are glad that the game, quote, gives them time to play other games. Not saying it's good when games demand dozens or hundreds of hours just to progress, at least depending on how it's done and how mandatory it is to see the basic content of the game. But there should be things to do in your game of choice if you want to in a live service MMO, especially if you're going to invest so much time into creating your character, spend money on premium subscriptions, and for many, spend a lot of money on scratch tickets regularly. For there to be so little to do in a game where people invest this much is seriously crazy to me. It's all just very sad. The game has incredible potential. The business model of stylish action space monster hunter with big booba waifu character creators should be a nearly automatic win. There's nothing that even comes close to doing this. The foundation for the combat is good despite boring, samey class design and over-reliance on counters for every single class. The world of Halpha genuinely is beautiful. The character creation is absolutely unparalleled. But the game around all of this just isn't enough and isn't of high enough quality. Obviously the game won't completely fail or die more than it already has. I mean, I've seen and heard a lot of people with complaints talking about how they're going to pull for certain things on multiple of the scratches coming out. PSO2 has made Sega over $1 billion in its lifetime. But it will probably never increase its player base significantly at this point, it won't be respected in the MMO space, and few people looking for action combat are going to consider it. Its reputation is and will be solely for screenshots and ERP, and that is, for better or worse, enough to keep it bumbling along. If you made it through all this, please know I do truly appreciate you taking the time to listen. I do apologize for anyone that might feel called out, including GWiz, who I do have respect for. I just hold the series to a high standard given its history, and I just want to see things truly improve.